Right, it's time now for our second speaker. Now, last year, the acclaimed publication Kinfolk underwent a dramatic redesign to celebrate its 10th year in print. This new visual direction was led by Alex Hunting, the founding designer of the eponymous London-based studio and the magazine's design director. Aiming to ensure Kinfolk stays ahead of the pack, the rebrand features custom typefaces from Schick Teucher, and Alex is joining us today to tell us about some of the crucial design decisions that went into the redesign and also to discuss Kindling, the new offshoot magazine for people with children. Hello, Alex.
Hi Matt, how you doing?
Very well, thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, very good, very good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I think we're hoping that there's not going to be some proofs sent to the studio where you are in the time that we're talking.
Yeah, no, let's hope not. Yeah, that wouldn't be ideal, would it? Um, yeah, I was mentioning to Matt, we've got some issues with paper stocks on some of the issues, so we could easily have some proofs arriving at any moment for some new paper styles.
Well, listen, fingers crossed that that's not the case. But yeah, I guess now that you're not going to be doing a talk today, Alex, instead I get to ask you lots of questions, but also anyone in the audience as well. Please feel free, as ever, to pop your questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to ask Alex for you. But I guess my first question was really, I'd love to know how you approached the redesign of Kinfolk last year, because as we all know, the magazine is it's always been such a high watermark for that kind of premium print magazine. So what was the reason for revisiting it? And then what was it that the design needed to move on? What was influencing that decision?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it was a number of things. The main one that you mentioned was like it is the 10th anniversary of the magazine. So Kinfolk was founded back in 2011. So it kind of just felt like we've been talking about a redesign for quite a while. And obviously 10th anniversary, it just had to be really at that point because, it's such a kind of big milestone for the magazine and for the team. Um, and, the magazine's been through a number of kind of iterations over the years, or, it's had a few redesigns. But the last one was actually, was back in 2016. So it's a long time really for long time to kind of be with the same design. So we were just also a bit conscious, I suppose, of that. I mean, I feel like it hadn't totally, like we were still happy with it. And obviously we'd refreshed elements of the magazine kind of, throughout, that period of 5 years. So it wasn't sort of exactly the same, but, in terms of a kind of wholesale, like looking at it again, it just felt like the time was right for it, really. And you mentioned about kind of, I guess, its influence, and I think it's kind of, Kimfolk's always been influential from, I guess, right from its first, the first design. I suppose it was part of that kind of set, that group of like breakout independent magazines, I suppose, about 10 years or so ago, and that kind of very minimal, kind of stripped back aesthetic was pretty influential in, well, particularly in independent publishing. Do you know what I mean, around that time? And I suppose that's probably a bit of a reaction against what was going on in mainstream magazines, I suppose, at the time. But in terms of its influence, I've not really. It, I just think that you just always want to be trying to redesign before, do you know what I mean, before something becomes, kind of you just see everything everywhere. And it's not that people are specifically copying Kinfolk or anything like that. It's just that, it just becomes, it sort of seeps into the visual landscape, I guess, a bit. And when something's, got a big following or, very popular, um, it just naturally is quite influential, I suppose. So, we were just keen to move it on. And 10th anniversary was just, perfect opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, did you feel any added pressure knowing that you'd done a really successful redesign in 2016, as you mentioned? Was there kind of added pressure on this one alongside it being the 10th anniversary as well?
Um, I mean, I think I felt more. I think there was more pressure really in 2016 for me personally, just because that was obviously, that was when I was brought, on board, into Kinfolk. So, I think. that was, it was obviously, I mean, it's a big job this time, but it was, at the time, it felt like a very, quite a scary sort of thing. It was something that's kind of so, so loved. And I was very, very aware of it, very aware of it, very aware of, its readership and that sort of thing. I think this time round, I probably feel a little bit, maybe a little bit less pressure, in the sense that, having worked with the magazine for kind of 5 years, I hopefully feel like I know the audience a bit more, or, um, you know, know a bit more about kind of, the magazine. I mean, there's always going to be things that people don't like when you redesign something. um, and particularly when something's got, like a really strong kind of community that's been generally built around it, like Kinfolk has right from the start. I mean, there's people that have been reading it, for a decade. Um, so, there's always a bit of pressure, I guess, with that. And hopefully people like it. I mean, redesigns come along a lot of the time, and it takes you a little bit of a while to kind of to get on board with it anyway. I know, like, I felt like that about, magazines that I've loved in the past, that have, had a redesign. You thought, oh, what's this? And then it's only after it's settled down a bit that you think, oh, actually, that's, this is great.
Yeah,
So yeah.
definitely agree. I think sometimes you need a bit of time to live with something, and then it kind of, you start realizing slowly how good the redesign was. Um, I mean, we're seeing
Yeah.
lots of images up on the screen at the moment of the new issues, and I guess, what were the big things that you and the team felt needed freshening up and updated in terms of kind of details? What was it, that you felt would be able to give it a new look?
Well, I think the Kinfolk team, we spoke about, kind of, I guess we spoke about a lot about, what we thought was working, as well as what wasn't working. Um, so John Burns, the editor in chief, Harriet Fitzgerald, editor, and Christian Muller Anderson, art director. We all kind of, we basically went through kind of a lot of aspects of the magazine, and sort of spoke about, yeah, I guess, not just design wise, but editorially, what we felt was working. Um, and I think the structure we decided to keep the same. So the structure of the magazine, like, the editorial team felt like it was serving us quite well, like the way that we section the magazine, which we changed in the last redesign. Um, and actually that was quite helpful, because kind of keeping that same editorial structure sort of meant that, design wise, you'd kind of feel like you were, the reader would sort of have a familiarity, despite the fact the design was going to, change quite a lot. But in terms of what needed changing, I guess obviously the main thing, which the whole kind of redesign is based around, is the typography. Um, and I mean, I love the type that we had chosen. We had in the last. I should say this is all Kindling, by the way, not
Yeah,
Kinfolk. Um,
suddenly changed.
um, yeah, but I love the type that we had, that we'd used in the previous iteration. But yeah, it just felt like, kind of, as a wholesale change, the type, basing it around sort of quite a distinctive, typeface family. It was always kind of what I had envisaged, really. Um, and it's kind of just to try and make it, like, make it more ownable, I suppose. We've sort of spoken about, like, the influential thing, but um, Kinfolk's very much known for kind of its imagery, and
Mhm.
the art director is imagery, and equally it kind of felt like I wanted to give kind of quite a lot of weight to, do you know what I mean, to the typography, in terms of, making it kind of quite identifiably Kinfolk moving forward. Um, I mean, we changed a lot of other stuff as well. Like, we kept the size the same, but we changed sort of the paper stocks, and we also kind of introduced, some new editorial formats to kind of help the reader a bit more. So we had some kind of, I guess, like, more readable essay formats. So
Mhm.
slightly, larger, some sort of more body texts, like size style, so like slightly larger text. So we sort of, it was also kind of, wasn't just, um, you know, just design decisions, there were some, nice improvements. I hope, hopefully for the reader as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to come on to Kindling because I appreciate, yeah, there's been some images of that on screen. We will come on to that, but I wanted to stay with typography. And I noticed that a couple of questions have come through on the chat as well about the typography. So you worked with Schicktoiker on a set of typefaces. What was your brief to Laurie and Florian from Schicktoiker?
Yeah, so it basically was for them to create a very a sharp, refined, kind of contemporary feeling serif family, kind of all, like in like the Latin genre of typefaces. So I was really keen for it to have like triangular kind of wedge shaped serifs. Um, and the idea was that obviously like at every point, we needed like a body, body text typeface, a deck sort of size for kind of stand first and pull quotes, and like a display, a much more sort of slick kind of display version as well for to use, very large for kind of big splashes of typography. And it was kind of just, we wanted it to just pack kind of as much character like into that genre, that kind of type of genre of typography. So we kind of went back and forth with a lot of references at the start of kind of starting points. And there were quite a few versions before, we ended up where we ended up. And one of the main parts of the brief really to them was I was really keen from the start. Like I love ligatures in sort of most, in typography in general, but I was just briefed them to create kind of quite an extensive set of like uppercase ligatures, to use for a lot of the kind of the feature openers and to use like a bit of decoration really. I think they just kind of, they create these really lovely moments where you sort of the reader almost does like a bit of a double take because your brain can kind of read something, but it's kind of sort of not quite right. And I've tried to use kind of some sort of interesting kind of arrangements, slightly more unusual kind of arrangements of sort of headlines and things with them, sort of emphasize the detail in the type. But those guys, they were absolutely amazing to work with. They sort of, like, lots of technical details and stuff, but I think they really got the brief anyway from the start. And kind of, it's a funny thing talking about type with people because, I mean, I'm not a type designer at all. Like I, draw typefaces every now and then, but not, but there's very much a kind of, ultimately it is quite an emotive thing about, how the typeface makes you feel. So having these conversations about, technical details are important, but it's also, it was really great to work with them because they really got, when we were talking about kind of, do you know what I mean, the subtle differences in the versions we were working on and how that kind of, do you know what I mean, how that sort of how that was making you feel as a reader.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Just staying with ligatures, because you mentioned them there. Tom in our audience has asked, how many ligatures are there in the final font?
Do you know what? I definitely couldn't tell you because I've not used all of them yet by any means, but I'm sort of chalking them off as we go through in headlines. But oh God, I mean, probably 25, 30, something like that. 20, 25. I mean, there's quite a lot. Well, I'll have to come back to you on that, Tom.
I mean, I think that's pretty, it kind of gives us a big picture of, it's certainly a lot more than you might expect. There's a really interesting question
even
here.
during the stage
sorry,
when we were, I was just saying, even during the stage, I'm pretty sure I had in my mind a headline that I was using, like mocking up, and I think the guy sent me like the latest set of them, and I was like, no, like we need, I can't remember what it was. He was like MA or something, like we need this one. So yeah, they were a lot of fun to play with.
I'm just imagining you in one of those calls, just demanding more ligatures every time. Olivia's asked a really interesting question. How did you set about prioritizing what needed to change and what should stay? And I guess one thing that kind of I wanted to touch on with this is, the white bars on the cover was such a kind of recognized thing about Kinfolk. And was it difficult to lose those bars, or were they one of the first things that you knew had to go?
Well, I actually wanted to lose them in the last redesign,
Okay.
but I wasn't. I suppose I wasn't certain about it, but it was definitely something. I guess when I went in, I was discussing. But I think that actually it was probably it was the right decision not to change it then. Maybe in the sense that I think we changed in the last redesign. We changed the size of the magazine fairly dramatically, like the physical size of the magazine in terms of the format. And we changed all of the type, we changed the papers, we changed a lot of stuff. So I think actually, kind of, there is like a degree of familiarity. Sometimes you do want to, do you know what I mean, bring with you. But I think everyone this time, like the entire team, was just like totally unanimous that this like everyone was on board in terms of the cover changing it. Um, it's Kinfolk wasn't by any means the first magazine to, do you know what I mean, to have that kind of what sort of white framing device, or to use it, but it certainly is like quite a key, quite an iconic sort of, I suppose, part of the design. So it was a difficult decision, but yeah, 10th anniversary, I think it gave everyone quite a lot of leeway to, do you know what I mean, to to make that big call. But I'm sure there will be people that will be unhappy about that. But hopefully everyone will come on board.
Thanks. I'm sorry, I completely hijacked Olivia's question there. So her question was also about how you prioritize what needed changing and what needed to stay the same. Apologies, Olivia.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess, I mean, it's just like from the team, really. Everyone, um, yeah, as I was just mentioning there, there is some things you kind of want to take with you. There's like, I, you want there to be a little bit of familiarity. How we prioritize the stuff. I mean, um, I think, I guess it's just like what, we don't do focus groups or anything like that, really, that sort of thing. But I suppose, the team the team have worked together for quite a while, and, know the readers very well. So um, I guess, yeah, just a lot of kind of discussions really around the table about, the things which are strong, and I guess having honest conversations, and people in the team telling you can't do exactly what you want, quite rightly, and and what's and being honest about what's good for the magazine, what's good for the readers, that sort of thing.
Lots of
Yeah,
discussions, I can
sorry, that's
imagine.
probably not a very clear answer. Yeah.
No, no, I think that was great. Yeah. Let's take a look now at Kindling. So that's the new offshoot magazine, which is described as a magazine for people with children. So it's not for children. It's designed to be read by their parents. But you've also mentioned before that you still wanted it to be visually appealing to children. What design challenges did that create, having kind of two different and very different readers in mind?
Yeah, quite a lot. I think. Well, I think we thought maybe it'd be a bit easier than it was initially than when we started sort of doing it. But I mean, it is designed to be read by adults, but there is stuff for children in there. So there's we have like a section which is called fun stuff. So it's pretty clearly marked what it's for. So sort of things like activities and um, basic content for specifically for kids. So and we also, particularly in the first issue, we kind of had sort of editorial devices that ran throughout the magazine. So like we called it Kids Corner. So kind of little moments during main articles for adults where there were little things for kids. So I think we kind of wanted the magazine to be very approachable, I suppose. So very not kind of family. So it could be something that could be passed around, like the family, basically. So it needed to be appealing visually, yeah, to kids and to adults. I think we did that. We did that from we used fantastic illustrator that Stefan Sundström, our art director, found Espen Freeberg, who's just like absolutely fantastic. And he's done both the covers and kind of illustrated like throughout pretty much the almost all the illustration, apart from a little bit in the kids section in the second issue. But I think kind of having that consistent style of illustration is quite sort of appealing to adults, because there's like a visual consistency that adults can slightly. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if we'd had sort of 50 different illustrators, it might be appealing to kids in that way, but it's probably a bit too kind of, maybe messy or etc. for adults. So that the use of illustration was quite important, I guess, to us. And Espen's style is just kind of really amazing. It's like very kind of naive, like lovely, like thick kind of line drawing style. And we've used it in, sort of mono. So, it's quite, I guess, it's quite sort of appealing to kids, but also, yeah, to adults. So yeah, we've done a number of kind of things to try and, do that. I guess also the format is quite, we wanted to make it quite approachable, as a format. So compared to something, I guess, like Kinfolk, which is quite, very, it has quite a weight as an object, I guess, and it's sort of meant to be a bit coffee table, esque, etc. Kindling's, much sort of smaller, it's still got quite high production values, but it feels a bit more kind of throwaway, like you could pass it around, your kids could probably scribble in part of it. It's got a kind of textured coated cover, so, you can get grubby sort of kids' fingerprints all over it and wipe it off. So there's a number of kind of things that we tried to do, do you know what I mean, to try and tackle that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really nice. I mean, you can tell, and I guess we're seeing some images cropping up on screen now, and yeah, I'm sure everyone will agree. When we wrote about Kindling, I think you told our writer that you'd kind of scoured educational resources and even scientific journals for inspiration. What were some of the elements that you really liked in the research, and I guess, yeah, what then fed into the final designs?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of it was like just around, I guess, the visual language of sort of education or learning. So, one of the things that we use a lot alongside, photography, typography, illustration, is we kind of use these sort of geometric kind of like graphic shapes quite a lot. So, and they're very simple kind of shapes, but they're sort of drawn from, those kind of educational kind of activities books that you used to get as a child. So we kind of sometimes use them as sort of infographics to kind of help, like, kind of illustrate a piece. So if we have, kind of statistics, or if we have, kind of little short pieces about a particular topic, we'll try and use them kind of graphically to help like tell the story. But they also, apart from just being infographics, they also just sort of help act as like containers for text and that sort of thing. So they were quite a big part of, that kind of language of education, I guess. And then also typographically, one of the typefaces, well, the main kind of the body text typeface that we use is Century Schoolbook, which is, pretty much the typeface used in pretty much every textbook or schoolbook you probably would have had growing up, So it sort of gives you that, takes you back a little bit, I guess, when you see it.
That's a really nice detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. A really interesting question here from Rachel. Are you mindful of accessibility throughout your design process, or how much do you think about accessibility when you're designing?
Yeah, quite mindful. I mean, I suppose the thing graphic designers are always guilty of is, yeah, sort of making the type too small. um, uh, so yeah, quite mindful. I mean, I think, particularly with this project, we wanted it to be really accessible. So, we hopefully it's just appealing Do you know what I mean? In lots of ways to like quite a wide audience. I mean, I think we were quite conscious that if we had designed, I think it was maybe slightly unexpected, not necessarily what people would expect the team at Kinfolk to design, essentially a parenting magazine in this way. I don't think people would have expected that much. That there is a certain way we could have done that design. Do you know what I mean? That would have fitted, more kind of, I suppose, directly to its oldest, its older kind of sibling. But I don't think we
Yeah.
wanted to do that at any point. I think um, we wanted it to be much more approachable, much more kind of accessible, and much more fun, basically.
We've had a
Does
question,
that answer?
which is, yeah, no, absolutely. We've had a couple more questions come in, which is brilliant. Lauren has asked, what tip would you give your younger self before going into the design industry? So yeah, with everything you've learned on Kinfolk and other projects, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self now?
Um, Before going in, uh, I mean, approach people you admire. I think one of the, um, yeah, I guess I've I've been quite lucky with some of the, very lucky with some of the jobs that have come along, and kind of through people that you've met and that sort of thing. Um, but I think particularly in editorial design, essentially it's text and image, right? So you basically want to be working with good content. So you want to put yourself in a position where you can work with, say, a great photographer, work with a great writer. So I would say be very proactive and be very kind of open to, putting yourself out there, really. Um, Getting in touch with, yeah, people you admire, because more often, like, the great kind of work always comes from if you've got, a talented team, or if there's passion kind of in the project, like that always comes across basically in, do you know what I mean, in the outcome. Um, so yeah, I would say that. I mean, that probably applies across the board to design, really, but I guess particularly editorial design.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a
Yeah.
brilliant piece of advice to anyone in any creative field is reach out to people and yeah, particularly if you really love their work. Yeah, there's no harm in getting in touch,
Mm.
I think.
I'd also
Maybe just
probably
one
say,
final question.
oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. Yeah, please.
go
No,
on.
go.
No, I suppose the, like, practically, or the thing which I still think today, or still is still a part of, my day to day, is I've kind of always thought that design is, graphics is a craft, like, as in, rather than necessarily than an art. Like, I know you have sort of, there are artists, like, and this is probably quite controversial in some ways, but I think, that sort of adage of like 10,000 hours, or whatever it is a, really is a thing. And I think, in particularly in editorial design, because it's such a, you you often have like a very tight sort of brief in terms of, even if you're designing like a feature or something like that in itself is quite a contained brief. And I always remember, like, even from my pretty much my first internship, when I was doing a year out, my year out in industry was at, actually, no, sorry, it was just when I left uni, but was at, Studio 8, which was, Matt Willey and Zoe Bafer's studio. And I'm sure that's something that's nice that, you know readers know about them. But they worked on lots of editorial projects, and I remember they were working on a book, and they they printed off sort of, I think it was, it would have been like 12, 13, 14 versions of like the same spread. And I remember thinking, like, seeing one and thinking, oh, like, that's the one, that's amazing. You can't design something better than that. And then I think they sort of printed off 20 something more, and there were seven or eight better versions of the thing there. So I think, I just, I, I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I suppose it is like, you learn by doing entirely, I think, with generally with this thing. And you know you want to kind of always keep pushing something, however subtle the difference is, until something clicks into place. um so that would be a more practical tip, I guess.
Yeah, it's another brilliant piece of advice there. I think we've probably got time for just one more question, but I definitely wanted to come to this one from Margarita. Where do you start to design a new issue of the magazine? Can you say a bit more about that process?
Yeah, well, it's quite, we work quite far, I guess, you know, in advance. I'm sure you know about publishing schedules and that sort of thing. So yeah, quite far in advance, but we basically have, there's a series of like editorial meetings, kind of throughout our publishing calendar where everyone's checking in, talk about ideas at the start, and yeah, talk about possible ideas for stories, chase those leads, and then by the time everything comes basically to me, it's in quite a lovely state. So I miss out on a lot of the stress of the editorial team have to go through. But then really it's kind of about thinking about how to, when those stories come in, what treatment each story's going to get, and how we might develop. At the moment, obviously, we're a few issues into the new, the redesign. So it's still kind of about pushing, different elements of it and seeing, kind of seeing maybe what works, or pushing kind of the way we approach features, like to defining that style. So yeah, and then it's kind of basically working out the way to put all of those pieces together, those like different design elements, different story types, putting them together. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate you answering all those questions and those questions from the audience as well. I really appreciate it. And I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.